Hello, everyone. So the world champion Gukesh got destroyed in this game. He got completely crushed right from the start. A real chess lesson. He has white and starts with the worst move, d4. His opponent is Matthias Bluebaum. You might not know him. He's a young player who was the surprise of the candidates tournament. What is the candidates tournament? It's a tournament that takes place in a few months and will pit the best players in the world against each other, at least those who have qualified. And the one who wins the candidates tournament will be able to face Gukesh in the World Championship final. And Matthias Bluebaum, as I mentioned, qualified to everyone's surprise because he has the lowest ELO rating in this candidates tournament, the lowest ranking. And the lowest ranked of Gukesh's future challengers is about to crush Gukesh here. Let's watch. e5 is played. Gukesh plays bishop c4. This is the start of the bishop. Knight f6, attacking the e4 pawn, d3 defends it. And now Bluebaum plays c6. He's going to try to play d5 to get a pawn center. And this pawn center will be the start of problems for white. So here, Gukesh plays knight f3, attacking the pawn on e5, but the push to d5. The bishop is attacked. Pushed back, it goes to b3. And now with black, you might be interested in capturing on e4. That's not what's going to be played. But it can be tempting to take on e4, since we're attacking that pawn twice. And if white recaptures, we can even uncastle the white queen. But after taking on e4, there's a move that causes problems. So it's not knight to e5, by the way, because if white plays king d5, the knight is unprotected, the king is exposed, and there would be queen a5, the fork. And that loses the knight. No, the move that causes problems for black is king g5, with this attack on f7 via the g5 square. That's why Matthias Bluebaum is not going to decide to take on e4. He could immediately put the bishop on d6 to protect the pawn on 5, but he's going to start with bishop, b.4 check. c3 is played, and now he comes to d6, taken on d5, taken back on d5. Both players are now going to kingside castling, and here the world champion plays bishop h5. He pins the knight and thus exposes the d5 pawn to being taken by the bishop. Black play bishop as well, that's normal. They defend their center. You know that when you have the center, you have to be able to hold it because your opponent will do everything to destroy it. And for now, the center is being held. But Gukesh attacks this center again with this push of the c4 pawn. The wing pawn against the center pawn. Black counter push with d4. And here there is first structural change. White now have a majority on the queen side. They have these 3 pawns against these 2 pawns. But black have more of a central majority heading toward the king side, with 5 pawns against 4 on the left side of the board. So now the game for both players will be to try to advance and exploit their majority while containing the opponent's pawn's majority. And that's what happens if I play knight to d2. The knight in any square needed to be developed, and it comes to control the e4 square. Knight d7 is played. Rook e1, on met de la pression sur le pawn de e5, and their bishop f5. Contre-attaque de Matthias Bluebaum sur le pawn arriéré d3. A backward pawn, it's a pawn that cannot be defended by other pawns, and which has difficulty advancing and is therefore exposed behind the opponent's camp. And that's the square for the pawn on d3. And here, Gukesh doesn't necessarily feel very comfortable with this position. We know this because he spent almost 20 minutes thinking about this move. You should know that these are 2-hour games for each player. And if they reach the 40th move, which won't happen in this game, but if they do reach the 40th move, they get a 30-minute bonus plus a 30-second increment per move, so they can play the endgame if there is one. But that won't happen in this game. There won't be an endgame. And so here, it's the first important moment of reflection for Gukesh, who takes 18 minutes. No, he takes about 20 minutes, and he plays knight a4. So there's the capture. Bishop takes e4. Rook recaptures since the knight f6 is cloué. h6 bishop takes. And here, you might expect the recapture of the knight to chase the rook. But he has another idea here. Matthias Bluebaum. He recaptures instead with the queen. And his knight won't go to f6. His knight is instead aiming for the c5 square, because that will push back the rook, just as it would on f6. But it will also put pressure on the pawn sitting on d3. So white preemptively moved their rook. In any square, it was going to be attacked. And knight to c5, putting pressure on the pawn on d3. Bishops to c2, and now white defend d3. They control the e4 square 3 times to prevent black from being able to use and advance their central majority. Central. And this retreat of the bishop prepares the b4 push to drive the black knight from that good square. So black player 5 to counter b4 and secure the knight square. White move their knight to d2. This gives the queen an escape diagonal, and the knight can also make use of the e4 square. Now the bishop has retreated to c7 and white play b3. So why do they play b3? In reality, white are looking to drive away the knight, and they might try to play a3 so they can play b4 afterwards. But black would take advantage of that to counter push with a4. The knight and the rook ensure the protection of the pawn, and if b4 is played, there would be the en passant. That's why white play b3. They're looking to play a3. Then b4. So we hadn't really talked about the retreat of the bishop to c7, but now we'll understand he plays queen d6, Matthias Bluebaum. And in this position, you have to understand that another imbalance has been created because we talked about the structural imbalance with the majority more in the center and on the king side directed toward the king side for black against the majority on the queen side for white. But there's another imbalance, which is the color imbalance, the opposite colored bishops. And so that gives the position a very sharp character. Each side will have an extra piece to play on one color. And the one who will win is the one who manages to activate their bishop. For now, both bishops are blocked. The bishop on the white square is really blocked, as we can see by the d3 pawn and the b3 pawn. Moreover, the bishop on the white square also has to protect the d3 pawn, which is attacked by the knight. But the bishop on the black square is also blocked by the pawn de fief. And white have good control. Quadruple control over this square e4. But here we can see that black are simply threatening to play e4 to open up the attacking diagonal towards the pawn on h2. So you might think that white will play knight to e4 or g3. But here, Gukesh is going to play queen h5. He defends the pawn. h2 increases the pressure on the pawn on e5. But now black will be able to advance with their pawn majority. f5 is played against the e4 square to prevent the knight from exploiting it. And they're starting to take space. The rook is also happy to find some squares. We'll see how black will be able to build this attack. White to move. Rook d1, rook a and e8. The knight comes to f3. The queen comes to f6. For now, we have a few placements in the position. And white play a3. So white are getting ready to chase this knight on b4. And the knight will not be able to stay. In fact, now we don't see many ways to prevent it. b4. So Bluebaum is going to decide to move his knight. He's going to give it a new role. He plays knight e6. The new role ultimately is to try to trap the white queen who is having trouble getting back to her side and is a bit isolated. Right in the heart of the position of black. I know it's white's turn to play, but to understand their move, let's look at what black are threatening. Black are threatening to play knight f4 now, attacking the queen. The queen, she doesn't have many squares. Look, she can go to h4, but then g5 pushes her back. The queen has fewer and fewer squares. She can go to g3, but then g4 pushes her back and the knight is attacked. Same thing, this knight does not have many squares either. And if it goes, for example, to d2, knight h5. And the queen is trapped. She is completely trapped with the knight attacking. The black squares, the pure ones that control the white squares. So in this position, this retreat of the knight threatens to bring the knight to the king side and try to trap the white queen. That's why white plays knight d2 to give an immediate retreating diagonal for the queen. Bishop d6 is played, teasing the pawn on a3. If this pawn advances, we can also place the bishop on b4, giving the bishop on the black square a new interesting diagonal. As I told you, the key in this position is to manage to activate the bishop that the opponent doesn't have. For now, neither player is managing to do so, but black seem to be in a better position to achieve it than white. So the world champion is going to counterattack. He plays queen f3, leaves the pawn on a3, but counterattacks. On b7, here, black plays rook f7, defending the pawn on f7 laterally and freeing up the f8 square, possibly for the rook. And here you have to understand that both players have only 40 minutes left on the clock. We're at the 25th move of the game, so both players have only 40 minutes left on the clock. And here, Gukesh with white is thinking. He thinks for a long time, 50 minutes. So he's starting to get into time trouble. But he's thinking about an interesting move. He's going to sacrifice the pawn on c5. Why does he do that? Why? To take back the c4 square with his knight. So there was bishop, takes a5. And he's going to immediately come to c4 to attack the pawn on e5 twice. To defend the pawn on a 3, attack the pawn on a 5. He's looking to get a nice square for his knight. This could be an interesting positional sacrifice. But the computer shows that in reality, he absolutely should have played queen d5 before any move with his knight. Why? Because he played knight c4. But as a result, he got hit with a counter push. Sure, white just sacrificed a pawn to find a square for their knight, but black are going to play. e4, they're going to open up the position. And black's hope is also to destroy the d3 pawn to open up that dark diagonal for their bishop. And in the game, there was the capture on e4. And here you might think, after all, it's true that with this push to e4, we win the pawn. But there's a move that Matthias Bluebaum had anticipated, which is knight g5. We attack the queen and triple up. The attacks on the pawn on e4, which allows us to win back the e4 pawn, with a strong duo of pawns, by the way. And after this move to g5, it's clear that Gukesh didn't see it coming because he takes another 10 minutes to think. And now we're left with 30 minutes for black and 15 minutes for white. And we're only at the 28th move of the position, so there's no time increment yet. You have to wait until the 40th move. So there are still 12 moves left to play. In fact, Gukesh won't even make it to the 40th move. So he only has 15 minutes left to play the game, compared to 30 minutes for his opponent. And on top of that, he's under pressure. So here, if the queen moves, we'll recapture on e4, opening up the file thanks to the advanced pawn. So Gukesh decides to take the pawn on f5. But look at the subtlety of Bluebaum's play. He plays queen to e7. So these pawn sacrifices are very interesting. He sacrificed his pawn on e4 to deflect the d-pawn and then be able to play d3 to free the bishop on the dark square, attacking f2, finding a target, playing with the bishop that the opponent doesn't have. Remember, I told you that the key was to be able to play with the bishop that the opponent didn't have. And now he opens the f-file. And so he's going to get that target on f2 with the king. And the rook in fork. So queen g6 is played. So you have to be careful because white can also play along the light diagonal, but the knight on g5 is there for now. There won't be a mate. And d3 right away. We attack the bishop. We free our bishop on the dark square. Bishop takes d3. Bishop takes f2. Check king chain. And here you could take the rook right away. But Matthias Bluebaum is precise. He plays rook first. f6. He pushes back the queen, so there are no more issues or problems on that light diagonal. So just like that, he wins the exchange. Bishop takes, rook takes. And here, Matthias Bluebaum plays b5. And it's a new move that will make Gukesh think. He'll take quite a bit of time. He'll play his move, but he'll end up with 6 minutes with white against 21 for black. So you can feel the difficulty. So why was b5 played? Well, it's not to distract the knight and take the pawn on a3. Not at all, because the queen could take the rook with check. The idea behind b5 is simply to divert the knight, get it out of play, and be able to continue the action with black. You might say yes, but the knight could come back to e3. In fact, that's the best move according to the computer. But it's still completely lost for white, even this knight e3 move. Black can play, for example, knight e4, with threats of knight f2 as well. We're not afraid of knight f5, for example, which attacks the queen because of knight f2 check. And the rook is taken with mate. Well, it's not mate yet. King g1, queen takes, the bishop can come back, but we're very close to mate. So after this b5 push, Gukesh thinks for a long time, and he doesn't go back to e3. He decides to take the f5 pawn, and here rook f8 is played. You can sense the back rank mate coming. For example, black could threaten knight takes e4. If the bishop takes, it's mate immediately. Rook f1, rook takes, we recapture with a back rank mate. And if it's the rook that takes, it's the same. There will be rook f1, bishop takes, and rook f1 mate. So white are under threat of a back rank mate, and white play h4. They attack the knight, and then an incredible blow, a complete surprise for Gukesh, the move he's going to make here. Matthias Bluebaum. So I invite you to look for it at your leisure. What would you play with black? You'll see, it's not so obvious. So what did you think of? Well, one might think of saving the knight, but not at all. Matthias Bluebaum is going to play queen e5, and that's a complete surprise for Gukesh because he's going to use up his last few minutes thinking. In fact, he'll play his move very quickly and will have only 1 minute left on the clock. And he'll end up resigning because the position is completely lost. But let's understand the move. 5. Why does Bluebaum leave his knight hanging? Well, Gukesh isn't even going to take it. He's going to play rook g1. And as I said, there's only 1 minute left and he's going to resign. If the knight is taken, there would be a recapture, and the idea is to open up the lines. Earlier, we had the idea of opening the diagonal, of opening the f-file. And ultimately, the theme of the game is the opening of the lines, because here the idea is to open the file. We're threatening rook h6 with the win of the queen. There is no way for white to prevent this rook h6 from happening. If the king, for example, comes to g1, we give a check. He'll be forced to go back to the file, and rook h6 comes, the fatal pin. So Matthias Bluebaum plays queen e5, and he's not afraid. Pawn takes knight because of the recapture and the opening of the file, which will be fatal for the white king. Gukesh, with very little time, can't find a solution and plays rook g1. And he gets hit. Queen g3, resignation. Why? In square off capture, we're going to play rook f4 anyway, to play rook h4 now. And we won't even be talking about winning the queen anymore. We'll be talking about mate. And if Gukesh doesn't take the knight in any square, this idea is still possible. Rook f4, rook takes h4. But the computer shows an even faster mate. It shows a superb move, the move knight to f3. Magnificent threatening queen h2 mate. If white takes with the pawn, queen h3 mate. Definitely we're delivering mates, and if it's the queen that takes, well, we can simply take the queen, and mate will come very quickly, especially since the pawn still can't recapture because of the queens. h3 mate. What did you think of this game? You can leave me comments, share the video, support the channel, give it a thumbs up, of course. And we'll meet again soon for the end of this coverage of the Tata Steel tournament. If you haven't seen the previous videos, you can access the playlist above. Goodbye, everyone.